So, I made a claim a few months ago. This is also why Final Fantasy VI is accidentally a dog boy game. That's a tall order, looking back, right? And one that puts me on a particular back paw here, since there really isn't a clean way to explore this game now, since everyone here is presumably here to see me answer to what sounded like a joke in my video on the After Years. But here's the thing. It isn't a joke. We will be spending, hopefully, most of this video looking at Final Fantasy XVI and how I think it is, in some ways, weirdly, deeply furry-coded. I just also can't do it in a vacuum, because even if you are here to see that, even if you just genuinely want to see me dissect this game as furry art, I can't believe that on some level you are here to see that analysis subsequently bend towards an assessment of whether or not FF16 is good, actually. And the thing is, what I want to talk about with this game has very little to do with whether or not it's good, and if I were to fall into your trap on this, then honestly, my assessment would be largely irrelevant. I would essentially just be saying that the game is good in so many horny, weird words. So, I'm not going to do that. Or rather, I'm going to do that in reverse. Final Fantasy XVI is a good video game, you can quote me on that, and while it pales in comparison to the point I actually want to make, I will start here, because having actually seriously played and beaten it now, at last, I can fully bury this axe I have to grind with the public's extremely strange perception of this game. I have heard many things about it. That it is an incurious game, that it squanders its female characters, it's gays, that it's racist, that it's boring, that it only wants to say as a piece of art that slavery is bad and nothing else. And while I will not nor cannot refute all of these points, I think that there is something very telling in its reception. So, for those of you, my real supporters, my only fans, that's not a thing, right? I will say, you're going to have to wait for me to get the normies up to speed here before we can have our treats. Or, like, you can skip ahead if you prefer, but good dogs will wait patiently, right? Look, I'm going to behave. Sorry, I'm not going to call any of you any of that until you earn it. Look, I'm putting the cat Sona away. We're going to be adults about this. I'll even use my human Sona for this one. Wow, look, it's me. Okay, let's talk about JRPGs. I essentially had to rewrite this section from scratch because it is devilishly easy to fall into petty squabbling about the game's reception on social media. My introduction to it was a couple of my furry friends telling me that I have to play it, and I definitely was like, wow, ew, you're a furry? I don't even know what that is. Wow. No disrespect to Akane Kurashiki. You would love furries, I'm sure. But basically, right after that, it was the endless discourse about the game being racist, being poor queer representation, being too edgy and misery porny, too politically insipid, and that is maybe not a great environment to really gain your own experience and thoughts on the thing from. But I am, despite the unfathomably callous greed of the CEO of Square Enix, a fan of the series, and I have my reputation as the cat, a person online that insists that every mainline Final Fantasy is good, actually, so I went in ready to extract good out of this apparent mess, and that was about as easy an experience as it gets. I was cramming this game for like 9 hours a day, back to back, to get all the footage together for this video, rushing through the first ever Final Fantasy that joyously wastes your time with all the flourish and panache of a modern prestige AAA game, and I still found myself having a great time. As much as I could see a scene here and there that harkened back to all the complaints that colored my perception on the way in, there is a depth and an intimacy to this game that shines through clear as day, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm sorry, Jumpy. See, okay, I will use some of these complaints to help frame what I mean. Let's start with something easy, a warm-up round. Moose-boosh. And talk about Yahtzee's review on it. Hey, Yahtzee, welcome back. It's like 2009 never died. So this is pretty much the bulk of the criticisms I've seen from people less Twitter-rotted at the time. Clive is a dumb name, the game is kind of like Game of Thrones, its action combat is kind of lame. Okay, cool. I got nothing on the name thing. I I don't know what you want from a series that has names like Hope, Bartz, Fran, Waka, and Firm Albert. I don't know, man. I will say that the bulk of these complaints just kind of boil down to preference. Like, I've never been much of a character action sort. I've never played The Witcher 1, 2, 3, or live action Netflix show, and I found myself using combos and setups that would melt enemy health bars pretty fucking quickly, so like, I don't know. I don't know what to say on the mechanical side of things. The game is functional, not my favorite to play in the series by any means, but not so disastrously bad that I found myself having a bad time playing it. I actually had to be forced by my editor to not do all the side quests because I found the kind of methodical ease of the game hitting the same kind of easy tempoed satisfaction that I get from basically every other game in the series. I'd say skill issue here, but I don't think that applies. Like, I don't know, everyone has a time sink they like. Mine might just be this series, but you can see that it's probably best that on the mechanics front, we maybe just call it ceasefire, right? But that leaves us with a tantalizing option on the table. Game of Thrones. Y'all remember that, right? Look, okay, I'm biased on this front, because on the one hand, I cannot help but see in Yoshi P the same impulse that I had that led into the creation of a game I've put on temporary hiatus while I work on a totally normal visual novel about, I don't know, like the Titanic or something. But the impulse is an understandable one. I, too, have watched Game of Thrones and thought I could probably make something like that but better, or at least I could make it my way. And yeah, you can kind of see the signs there. Like, Annabella exists because they wanted a Cersei. Clive is a yassified Kit Harington, but, you know, they kept his dog alive. There's a youth with magic powers who gets fucked up but bad early on. Like, okay, sure, like, you can see it, right? So sometimes being a YouTube essayist is weird because you have to sit your audience down and do shit, like in my friend Bopper's video on Fire Emblem Echoes, where you just go like, hey, do you remember this basic element of writing stories that people use and have used for centuries? It's exhausting. But in this case, I would like to point out a particular friction here. See, the story of Final Fantasy XVI video game isn't just Game of Thrones. You wouldn't know if you only played the first chunk of it, and I know that there's some people who will get ornery with me that if the game isn't doing something within the first few hours, then there's no reason to assume that it will change, and this is a complicated one to pick apart because games, more than any other medium, are subjected to a lot of scrutiny around them as products. I can understand why. They are expensive, a good deal more so than going to the movies, provided you're smart and you bring your own snacks, or buying books. We all remember books, right? But I think that this discourse has an insidious way of turning everyone into a bit of a capitalist.
I'm doing the politics thing again. The algorithmic AI that obviously rewrites all my scripts has requested I stop doing that.
Hi, Steph. Welcome back to the channel. I don't mean to be a hater. Look, I even put myself in my least threatening human Sona form. Don't look at the Zero Escape games. But look, this video is rough, right? Like, I know you tried to predict that your haters would be coming at this from a particular way, and I am not here to call you names or anything. I'd say that I'm a fan of your work, but I kind of never have been. I've always been more into faces than heels. I'm sure you get it, but that's not really the point here. Look, Sterling's upset about a choice selection of things that Final Fantasy XVI allegedly does or doesn't do, is saying that it's a miserable game filled with nothing but horrible people and no means to meaningfully change the world around you outside of the main narrative. I don't mean to call her out here or anything, but this is very much the kind of video you make after playing, like, maybe 12 or so hours of the game by my math. It's telling that her contrasting game example is Fallout 3, which is a Western RPG, which itself has a very different philosophy around it. Like, yes, you have a greater sense of agency in Fallout games than in literally any Final Fantasy title, but so what? The Western RPG is largely an exploration of player agency as you go semi-episodically from scenario to scenario, with the overarching question being, what would you or your character do in this case? In contrast, most JRPGs are more invested in the piecing together of a world and a story. They are far more controlling of your characters, even in their big MMO titles that maybe Sterling used PNGs from while accusing Clive of genocide. Look, I'm sorry, that's my most petty complaint, I'm sorry, I'll stop. And they are doing that not because they are political cowards who hate fun and love racism, but because they're telling a different story than something like Fallout is. That's not saying one is better than the other, but they are like, genres. And yeah, you can make these kinds of declarations on the game that it isn't diverse enough, that it's not politically savvy or to your taste, but it's always going to be weird to me that people pump out content where they have to make essentially a snap judgment in order to get something out on the ground floor of the tide of discourse in hopes that it'll make number go up. Like, by the end of the game, I went ahead and did all the minor character side quests because the point of the game in the first half is a little more detailed than just, we wanted to make misery porn because Game of Thrones did it. Look, some context at this point that I believe was the filter for Sterling. Clive, young boy of Rosaria, sworn to protect his brother Joshua, essentially the crown prince, witnessed a tragedy at what was supposed to be Joshua's ascension ceremony, where seemingly Joshua dies along with his father, most of the knights, and overall the kingdom of Rosaria collapses. Rough stuff. Flash forward 13 years, and Clive, a jaded, bitter slave of the Empire, reunites with his childhood friend Jill and gets rescued by an outlaw named Sid who is planning to make a better life for the enslaved bearers. Where we are now in the story is the point right after Clive, living through these miserable years, kept alive by the singular need to get revenge for his dead brother, has discovered that he is the second dominant of fire, don't laugh, the guy that killed Joshua, and is just now trying to do good for others after coming to terms with what he is. It's a rough part of the story for him, and it's narratively appropriate to go to a place where the kind of bigotry against bearers is at such a concentrated extreme to better put into perspective why he should go on living. Like, the most salient point I've heard amidst the varied criticisms of Final Fantasy XVI is that it is not itself that complicated a story. It is told in pretty straightforward terms, and that doesn't have to be to your taste, of course, but I think that a lot of bad faith was put into the mix here. This isn't even reopening the complete cowardice of journalism around Dion as an openly gay character. Yeah, let's celebrate Rebirth for having background lesbians without any character to them, while saying that it's not enough to have Dion be a real, actual character that really actually kisses his boyfriend in the middle of a scene where they are the only people on screen. Do we want this? Is this fun, being pedantic and bickering about discourse? What I find interesting in Final Fantasy XVI is the tension between the establishing ideas of the game and the insertion of the greater villain regularly throughout it. Clive, Annabella, Joshua, Jill, Sid, Kupka, Benedicta, everyone who is a character in Valisthea wants to have their intense political drama, travel country to country, break the mother crystals, free the world from its dependence on magic, and at the first major hurdle, Ultima shows up, kills Sid without a thought, and makes some bizarre claim about Clive as his perfect vessel. Every effort to have a regular game and a regular story gets fucked with more and more, and that's interesting and good, because that's just like, what stories can do. It's a significant change in recontextualization of the stakes. Can you believe it? God, I'm so tired, Jumpy. When Professor Bopper did his retrospective on the series, he talked about how 16 feels like the end of the series, even if it isn't true, and I do understand that. For all the complaints about how the game is Final Fantasy in name only, fully migrating into action RPG, the game is overtly Final Fantasy, fighting reference after reference after reference. The entire premise itself reads as a love letter to the weakest major summon spirit in the game, Ifrit. Usually the one you get first. Here, you get to embody Ifrit and kill basically every other summon in the series. This is on top of the bigger, grander stakes revealed progressively through the story, a game that starts as a simple revenge tale turned into a story about freeing slaves, turned into a story about ending the very nature of the world as people know it, into a story about the fundamental ideas of what it means to have autonomy and freedom if people are inevitably going to do harm with such things. Positions 16 as a great mythological tearing down of all things. Clive is, at least textually, a pariah to many on his epic quest to ruin the status quo for the entire world, and this is, for better or for worse, the closest the series gets to having a great man in the, political theory sense. He is uniquely powerful, uniquely selfless and brave, and that can be abrasive to some, but I can't help but reckon with Clive crying more than I think any other major character in all of Final Fantasy. I'm gonna be honest a bit. You can make fun. Steph Sterling, if you're still watching, you can take a shot at me over this, but I did cry at the end of the game, first with Joshua's death, then with Clive's after the final battle, and a lot of that came through on just the sheer fidelity and intimacy the game brought to the table. I've never been a graphics human. I don't really give a shit about seeing every pore in a character model's face or whatever, but there is something about the captured nuances of these characters set against the frankly astonishing voice acting from the principal cast that made me stop and take it all in. For the moments in the game where I was put off by some repetitive boss fight, some meandering quest with a facile justification to hit you with a mini-boss as though they were too scared to have a quest to just be taking your girlfriend to see a field of her favorite flowers, I think that the ambition to take something that starts you in the pit of despair and make you claw your way into a world where you befriend not just the most important and powerful magical allies, but that there's the capacity to help everyone who's helped you in turn. All of that is laudable and interesting ambition. Ending it with Clive dying on the beach that makes you stone is effective, and I think a lot of the pushback on it comes from the adherence to meet the game on very surface-level terms. Clive's struggles aren't a direct reflection of you, your intentions, your philosophy, but it becomes this grandiose thing as the fight for a salve to his heart, to his plight, to the plights of others, to the fundamental dignity of existence blooms over time. Again, this isn't some bold, adventurous storytelling, but its direct approach helps to make the story feel suitably epic, both textually and metatextually. So, there. Final Fantasy XVI is a good game. I don't even think that it's hard to recognize. I think that more people, me included, need to remember that side quests aren't mandatory, and if Northreach has bummed you out, just push the main story more, get to the good parts, the horny stuff, the tender-hearted reunions and partings that pepper this game, Wait, hold on, what was that? Oh, do you want to know more about the horny stuff? Okay, fine. Let me get changed. Hi. Look, I said what I said months ago, but if we're going to do this, we're all just gonna have to get real cool about some stuff real quick. So, sit down on your knees, I'll fetch you a treat in your water bowl, and you're gonna be a good doggy while I talk about furry culture and its perspective and intentions on art. How does this relate to Final Fantasy XVI being easily one of, if not the horniest game in the series? Well, don't interrupt me. So, on the surface, there's probably a lot that reads as pretty conventionally horny stuff here. Benedicta is a hot girl. There's that scene where Jill's all pretty and naked. The gay kiss is appropriately sexist. Shit! The gay kiss is appropriately sexless. I think the closest to freaky human horniness is the time Barnabas fucks his mom, a character Ultima impersonates one time, never shows up again, and this is after he gay kisses Ultima as Kupka. Like, Ultima has a lot of sex for someone who wants to wipe out humanity and start Valisthea over. Anyway, I think it goes deeper than that in some interesting ways. One of the initial textual elements that is played with a lot are these dominants themselves, people who can channel and embody the icons of Final Fantasy. Ifrit, Shiva, Rama, Garuda, Titan, Bahamut, Phoenix, and Odin, a classic set, and themselves plus the DLC Leviathan making up every primal in the other Yoshi P game, Final Fantasy XIV. Isn't that cute? A lot of work is put into textually establishing that these 8 people are themselves and their personas simultaneously. They can be felt, called to, but when channeled, they become a single person with a single mind, used predominantly in the big spectacle sequences in the game to make things suitably epic and large scale. Okay, so here's the thing, pup. As a certified monster fucker, Ifrit has always been hot in these games, okay? He's hot here, and here, and here. That's fine. No one's pretending otherwise. But the way that Ifrit's been portrayed in this game gets weird. Like I need to back up here a bit. So, on the ethics of boinking animal people, internet dog Patricia Taxon lays out criteria for furry art.
The 3 axes of furry art are the symbolic, the sensory, and the autistic.
And that's rolled around in my head for like a year and 9 months or so. Long-term listeners may very well remember that I waffled about defining furry culture in my Echo video 7 centuries prior, as it's a weird community to look at once you zoom out enough around it. Having shed myself of the inhibitions and shame that clung to my psyche around the stuff for, 18 years, fully admitting that I'm a furry, that I'm Therian or whatever, and that it's a meaningful enough part of the way I see myself that I risk my boss at work finding out that they hired a cat, I return to this question still kind of divided. See, I showed this video to some of my furry pals, and a lot of them struggled with the first hurdle, which is to say that a lot of furries look at Zootopia and go, that's obviously furry art, what is she talking about? And okay. I think that on a macro scale, it is very easy to say that furry art is when anthropomorphic animal exist. It's comfortable, it's easy, it makes the tent real wide. I used to grapple with including cat girls in this category, having interned as one for 7-8 years or so, but I think that these categories Taxon defines are useful in assessing the spirit of a piece of art. That's how you can look at something like Mouse and go, Art Spiegelman may not himself identify as a furry, but he made something in the way a furry would. It's the focus and fascinations of art that Taxon's looking at beyond the sheer surface level. Maybe I'm wrong. If she's listening to this now, feel free to disagree, but this is what makes sense to me, because otherwise the above blanket category completely collapses the moment we leave a medium that doesn't use classical descriptors. By this metric, Task stops being furry because there's no explicit text that identifies an anthropomorphic animal, even though the creator is one. Any veneer of a justification that the cover art somehow squares this, I don't think is satisfying either. Whether or not Twist's really great art is or isn't there doesn't change the 47 minutes and 41 seconds of music on the YouTube video. So looking at these more abstract qualities help flesh out how we think about furry media. What does this have to do with Final Fantasy XVI? Let me answer this later. You've been difficult ever since we started talking about this, and I need you to be a good dog, okay? Look, understanding these categories is an important part of the process because it speaks to the interesting underlying needs of the game. Mouse anthropomorphizes the Jews and the Nazis to symbolically express mass death. Beastars dresses up a pretty solid shonen anime with a tactile fascination of the beast. My master has politely asked me not to talk about the Rodfellas movie. You get it. Sometimes media that is not explicitly intending to present itself with animal characters crosses the human-animal blood-brain barrier and winds up where maybe it wasn't supposed to. Taxon uses Nascent by Alexander Panos in her video, but here I offer that Final Fantasy XVI has done the same thing because, let's be real, Clive is kind of a doggy. I'm gonna give you a minute to chew on that. I don't know, imagine me petting your ears while saying this if you want, while I ask the important question. How much of a doggy is Clive? Well, let's not get extreme here. This is still a AAA game, and there's a lot of formalities and restrictions on making a game that your greedy, heartless CEO needs to make more money than ever made before. So instead, let's talk about Rex. So, the exact same Patricia Taxon I was just talking about also wrote a short story on Tumblr about a dog named Rex. This meets all the criteria laid out in her video for sure, using what is essentially HRT but for dogs to slowly transition Rex from a more recognizably human form into a canine one. Specifically, Taxon chose to include a friend of his who is a trans woman to help secure the allegory and made the decision to make him straight in order to keep things clear. Transforming from human to animal is not itself a proxy for queer representation. It's not symbolism for being trans. The message isn't supposed to be exported into a more easily digestible position. It is, front and center, a story about someone who transitions from human to dog and finds joy and euphoria and fulfillment in doing so. It is undeniably an effective piece, something that's lived in my brain and filled me with such yearning that if I wanted to be generous, I would say that this accounted for some part of my identity as it stands now, even though the more textually obvious ones would be a friend of mine going through surgery and wearing my Amicus Kigurumi exactly one time. It is so devastatingly tactile, even as it traverses through complexities of sense meant to be unappealing, but conceptually the kind of notes that a more sensitive nose could piece together. It is a fascinating exploration of a type of physical longing that is the extant qualifier, our control agent in this bizarre experiment. It lives in the kind of bizarre, ambiguous space a lot of furry media does once it collides with the mundanities of more recognizably human experiences. Rex still has a job. There is still, on some level, a world that cannot so fully part with a part of Rex that functions as a human, but the concluding element is internal, personal. The story puts forth that the heart of identity isn't one of a tangible, binding social order, but a reckoning with the self. It may not have made me Therian, but as a compensation, it helped me understand why my parents may never understand this part of me, and also why that's okay. As a Therian, I don't particularly feel the need for government intervention, at least not until I face discrimination for this. It's less important to me what my identity does to the world and how it should see me than it is that my identity is meaningful to me, that it clarifies and helps me to understand my fraught relationship with my body, with my mind, that it explains on some level why I put on that kigurumi and felt the need to have a tail, why I could essentially feel it like a missing limb. It also plays out a very specific kind of dynamic that scratches my brain. See, Carmen transitions in the story too, though not medically. She goes from Rex's girlfriend to his owner, and how this transition changes so many facets of Rex's life. There's just... I don't know. It itches at my brain in a way that I've been learning since listening to more furry music and collecting a ton of furry zines. A lot of art in this genre tends to. Like, I may have repressed myself a lot. It's a lot to parse, and it keeps happening. Stories and songs that will make me cry out of nowhere because some part of this longing is painfully real to me. There is a real absence in my physical body that is hard to truly reckon with, and the pursuit of what this absence truly is has been terrifying. But just as Rex's first time with a collar and leash on, that fear ultimately smelts down into clarity. Knowing yourself can be truly terrifying, but the process of going from fear to fear, from shame to shame, and undoing them bit by bit is itself deeply liberating. I don't think anyone ever gets to painlessly know themselves, and that's an idea that we can even see in a big, sloppy, corporate-approved AAA title. Oh yeah, we're back in. No one on the internet seems to be brave enough to talk about the part of the game where Jill is Clive's owner. Like, yeah, okay, their relationship becomes more mature and heterosexual and on equal footing and whatnot as the game progresses, culminating in the game revealing to the world that apparently straight people can sometimes have kinks. But in the period of time where you're a broody man, Clive, going through Steph Sterling's Misery Tour, the much more interesting element at play for me is that Clive is Jill's dog. Yes, the heavy-handed slavery stuff hits some fucked up furry kink part of my brain. Can you tell that I was more into Astra than I should have been? I should explain that this in a vacuum is meaningless. I know that humans are into this sort of thing. I've read about that on the internet. But in the process of developing Clive, not just as a character, but also symbolically and thematically, he has time and again been equated to a beast. He shows up with Torgal at the start of the game in his noble puppy form, groomed, pristine, staying outside of the party because it's overstimulating for his doggy ears. Trust me, that's how you're supposed to interpret that. And then 13 years later, he's here, scruffier, called a beast's name by his fellow slave soldiers. And then when he has to infiltrate the enemy nation to get answers for who killed his brother, the only way they thought to make that work was to present Jill as his owner. Torgal gets reintroduced here, an echoing of Clive's growing feral ferocity, a cute puppy turned into a warrior beast. By the time Clive progresses to the second time skip, he's grown even bigger, more powerful, and notably shaggier, more wild-looking, and Torgal has in turn. Okay, look, the sheer tactile intimacy they put on him alone is enough to warrant a sudden change in topic, but, like, I can feel this creature's fur and paws. Like, look at him. Where was I? Yes, intimacy. I am, of course, in a situation where I don't want to sit here atop my greedy furry throne with you curled up on the floor by my paws, hoarding all kinks as inherently furry. I'm not that kind of bitch. But I will say that the game's animation does start to play tricks on my dumb kitty brain. Like, okay, this is all kind of happening by accident, right? Like, Yoshi P definitely didn't go into a dev team meeting at Creative Business Unit 3 and went, Cloud is secretly... Cloud? It's the wrong guy. After that mix-up was resolved, he said, Clive is secretly a furry dog man. You have to understand my vision. And then his translator said all of that to me later, and that's how I got this quote. But the AAA market has been long entrenched in a fidelity arms race. Mocap technology has been the thing for video games for some time now, and Final Fantasy XVI doubtlessly used that to some extent, especially to better lip-sync the English dub. But this collides hard with its grandiose aesthetics. Ultimately, Clive isn't really supposed to be a doggy. Like, we all know this. That's why Torgal isn't one either. He's a wolf. This is a werewolf story. Clive may be colliding with his creator a la Frankenstein, but where the ethical framework of Mary Shelley's work plays with the idea of what we think of as monsters, Clive is explicitly, textually, thematically a monster. He and Jill and all the other dominants to a lesser extent were crafted piece by piece, owner by owner, into the beasts they have become. So, reaching the end of all things, beating certified momfucker Barnabas, seeing the sky grow overcast and gloomy perpetually, this is a story about accepting this quality of monstrousness. Jill didn't need to be a bigger person and let her abuser live and prove that she has humanity and dignity. She fucking kills him, because this world makes monsters out of people. For all the criticisms lobbed at this game for being heavy-handed and ridiculous with the slavery theme, that it seems implausible that the most powerful people on this planet are the oppressed underclass, they are treated like animals, but in the sense that we actually use and rely on animals. Their flesh, their bones, proteins and collagen and lipids processed and dispersed into almost every element of our daily lives. See, I can be a killjoy pedant just as much as you can, doesn't it suck? The point is that this is what they have been turned into, and in colliding this thematic weight, this symbolic monstrousness, and spending untold amounts of time and money to make sure that Ifrit's snoot wrinkles like an animal creature when he snarls, like that is furry to me. Do I think that Final Fantasy XVI is a furry game? Well, according to the rough and possibly final draft of the title of this essay, I'm inclined to say yes here, but I think the more accurate answer is that it has crossed over into furry territory. I think the ultimate idea here is to portray flawed human society and have a godlike figure appear and to try and wipe the slate clean and make a better, perfect world, like the main villain of Tales of Symphonia. God, I gotta stop spoiling this one Tales game. But in the effort to make the analogy land, where a truer, intentional furry artist would have maybe given Clive the Dog Boy HRT, they instead work with all the power afforded a major game studio to thematically beastify him, and the result is this. For as much work as the kind of intimate storytelling, the subtle facial nuances afford some extremely beautiful sequences. Dion and Terrence's goodbye, Clive holding Joshua as he dies, the way you can see how Clive has a familiar tick with his paw when he gets upset. It's this kind of closeness that starts to cut both ways. At the risk of making this an indictment of the AAA market, I have seen a lot of intricate, detailed work go into something like The Last of Us. Big, powerful, nuanced character acting and play, but it doesn't read the same way. I think that the kind of aspirational sense of community, the idea that these beastly people have a hideaway, a little commune of friends and allies, that there is a part of their organization that is about improving society, but is also about tending to their own, growing fruit in barren fields, caring for each other. These sensibilities require a warmth to the characters that more cynical projects can't afford. This isn't a dig on more melancholy, cynical art. I love me a good tragedy, but Final Fantasy XVI is structured to start in a cruel, heartless world, and then through the course of it, cultivate coals, kindle sparks, embers, and nurse a full flame of revolution. Fire and beasts and a pack to call your own. I said that I wasn't going to reach the end of this paper trying to use the furry stuff to prove that this game is good. And I know I don't have to. But it is also what is the most meaningful to me. Like, the least interesting part of this stuff, the endless discourse, all of this is ultimately in service to extremely boring questions about art. The fact that all of this shit is here to answer whether or not the game is good by any imaginary standard is one of the most depressing realities of modern media criticism. Why do we care so much about trying to make these extremely banal general assessments of art when you could be like me, having fun with Dog Boy Clive? Wasn't that fun? Aren't you a good doggy? Special thanks to Alex Patanos, Alexi Angelica, Athena Stripes, Bees Louise, Blair Renix, Blueberries in My Coffee, Colleen T, Evan Kearns, Foxy Hex, Gail Simmons, Grizz, Lewis Wells, Low Res, Maria Aladren, Michael McNay, Mocha Lapin, Narai the Redmarked, Noun Verbally, Philip Pryor, Professor Bopper, Rob Leon, Saint Rawberry, Trade Good, Trinant, TV's Ross, and Zetetic. Thank you all very much.